Ambassador Kasemsri, members of the Council and guests, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this, the 100th meeting of the Baltimore Council. Allow me to thank the Westinghouse Electric Corporation for the reception in honor of the Ambassador, and to announce that our guest next Monday evening, the 2nd of December, will be Rinaldo Petronani, the Ambassador of Italy to the United States. Our topic this evening, as all of you know, is the foreign policy of Thailand, and Southeast Asia, of course, and members of ASEAN in particular, are of great interest to the United States. There is of strategic importance. I believe it's our 5th largest trading area in the world, and it's the home of some of our best friends. Thailand, of course, has been among our very best and most effective colleagues in international affairs. She's a critical actor with respect to regional stability and prosperity. The United States wishes ASEAN and Thailand well, and we cherish our relationship with this long friend of the United States. The problems which Thailand faces in international affairs are difficult. The refugee problem, what some people refer to as Vietnamese aggression, the achievement of economic stability and progress, of course, the questions of Kampuchea. Our foreign policy in that part of the world centers about the quest for regional stability. Thailand, as I mentioned, is central to that particular endeavor. In the late 1950s, people focused very seldom upon Southeast Asia and Thailand, and for a period of time, it dominated the thoughts of Americans. Today, Southeast Asia is less in the forefront of our minds. But nevertheless, the Council believes that it's extraordinarily important that we keep our attention focused carefully upon the region and upon Thailand in particular. We're extremely fortunate to have as our guest this evening to address the question of the foreign policy of Thailand, her ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Kasemsri has been ambassador to this country since 1982. He's a career Foreign Service officer. He served in the Philippine Islands, in Canada, the United Kingdom. He's been ambassador to Indonesia. He was his country's first ambassador to the People's Republic of China. He's also served as a representative to the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization and as Director General for Political Affairs and as Undersecretary of State for Foreign Affairs prior to becoming ambassador to the United States. He's a graduate of Trinity Hall, Cambridge University. His credentials are impressive. It's our enormous pleasure to welcome His Excellency Kasemsri.
Thank you very much, Frank Bird, if I may call you that way. And I hope that I overheard the piece of conversation as I came in again, because I went out one more time. And that because of the gas would be $5, I hoped it would not hurt you so much to listen to me for this next half an hour or so. I said I would be also available for questions and answers. In case that some of you might have not read the Washington Post or the New York Times, and I thought there had been a good exchange between President Reagan and General Secretary Gorbachev. And in one part, the President was telling him that somebody said that in America people can walk straight to him, in the White House, and tell him that he's a lousy negotiator for peace. And he continued, he said that, but somebody said, no, in Russia, it's even more greater freedom than that, because a Russian can walk to Mr. Gorbachev and said to the General Secretary that President Reagan is much worse Well, be that as it may, I assure you it has nothing to do with my subject this evening. I'm very pleased to be in this beautiful city and to have a commanding views of the harbor and to be treated in a very friendly way. I am very proud that my name could be added to already the famous rosters of the speakers who have come your way, the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs. I also feel that these 100 meeting that you do, 100 meeting is something which perhaps I am qualified. And the reason why it's not in my speech is that because my country happened to be the first country in Asia to have treaty relationship with the United States, which was celebrated in my home in March 1983, because it happened to be 150th anniversary of the treaty relationship between the United States and Thailand. They call it the relationship between the eagle and the elephant. Although I have to admit, I must admit with all humility, that discussing Thailand's foreign policy is at a time when the Geneva summit is very much the talk of the town, is quite a formidable task. But I do not believe that it is irrelevant. President Reagan put regional conflicts on the agenda of the summit because these conflicts can cause sparks and flies in the context of superpowers tension. Indeed, what happens in Southeast Asia and other regions of the globe can have a significant bearing on the relationship between the two superpowers and thus on the preservation of world peace. Historically, Thailand has accorded importance to foreign affairs. The two basic considerations underlying Thailand foreign policy decisions are the preservation of independence and the promotion of national well-being. It has been in the Thai consciousness that national survival constitutes the most important criterion in interstate relations. This philosophy is clearly reflected by the advocacy of pragmatism in our foreign policy to meet the exigencies of time and not a policy being governed by rigid theories or ideologies. How Thailand's foreign policies can contribute to the cause of world peace and progress, I hope, will become clearer in the course of my remarks. In order to appreciate the evolutions of Thailand's foreign policy, it seems appropriate to trace its history into four distinct phases, namely the pre-colonial era, and I would put it from the 13th to the 19th century. The colonial era from the mid-19th to the mid-20th century, the post-war World War II era, and the post-Vietnam War era. Many scholars contend that during the pre-colonial era, there was no conduct of foreign affairs as such. This doesn't mean that Thailand lacked contact with the world, nor does it mean that Thailand lacked a direction in its foreign policy. History indicated that in spite of the absence of a professional personnel and entity to handle foreign policy, it was clear that Thailand's external relations during that time was guided by the trust to promote economic prosperity and expansion of trade. During the early statehood of Thailand, and this is back again to the year 1238 to around 1350, commercial relations were established with immediate neighbors, while friendly relations were promoted with the Imperial China through frequent exchanges of embassies. King Ramkhamhaeng, one of our famous kings during that time, successfully formed the Kingdom of Sukhothai. It was he who officially opened relations with China and visiting Beijing, now Beijing, Peking, during his reign. This policy of keeping good relations with China, but at arm's length, was the linchpin of Ramkhamhaeng's foreign policy. By having friendly relations with China in the north, Thailand was able to expand its economic interests to the southern and eastern frontiers, while at the same time enjoy a flourishing trade with China. The rulers of Ayutthaya kingdom, which is the next kingdom after Sukhothai, from about 1350 to 1767, continued this tradition and further initiated contact with several Occidental powers and with Japan. By the mid-17th century, Ayutthaya was a cosmopolitan city and an open society with foreign traders maintaining their own enclaves and religious missions. Some foreigners were even granted the title of nobility by the royal court. King Narai, one of our famous kings from 1656 to 1688, in his attempt to strengthen cordial relations with France, sent an embassy to that country, first in 1681, but the ship was lost in the high sea. In 1684, he sent a second embassy to Versailles, accompanied by the first European-bound Thai students. This was the second recorded appearance of Thai in Europe, after the first embassy to The Hague in 1608. Indeed, the contact with foreign states during the Ayutthaya period further confirmed that foreign policy was a measure for securing commercial and economic interests for the nation. However, the Dutch gunboat diplomacies in 1664 and the 1687 incident of French warships took up positions in Thailand's trading port of Bangkok. Bangkok was not the capital city of Thailand. Eventually led to a fallout and mistrust between Thailand and the Europeans. And although France soon withdrew its troops and sought to restore relations with Thailand, the Thais were so outraged over the foreign intrigue that the government shut out Europeans for all practical purposes for the next 130 years. At the height of the European colonialism in the mid-19th century, survival as an independent nation was the preoccupation of Thailand's conduct of foreign policy. The defeat of China by Great Britain in 1842, the British encroachment of the Malay states in the south of Thailand, the intervention of the French in Cambodia and Laos in the east, and the growing aggressive demands from other European powers all represents a critical and dangerous reality to the Thai kingdom. It was a time of King Rama IV of the present dynasty, the one whom you know, I think, as the King and I. During that time, Thailand had to walk a tightrope, balancing between the preservation of national independence on the one hand and striving towards reaching a modus vivendi with colonial powers on the other. Thailand had to give in to certain European demands on Thailand's annexed territory and sign a number of unequal treaties and unequal and unfair treaties with European powers in order to preserve its independence. By the end of the 19th century, when all the other states of Southeast Asia had come under the colonial control, Thailand, due to its adroit and at times manipulative foreign policy, emerged as the only independent nation with a territory of the size which is that of Thailand today. It is worthy of note here that as the colonial pressures grew, Thailand started to turn more to an alternative source of strength and alliance. And we found the United States with its revolutionary zeal and the sense of fair play. As a gesture of friendship and goodwill, King Mongkut the same king and I, in 1860, wrote to President Buchanan, offering him elephants to be used in the American transportation system, in his own words, in his letter at the Library of Congress, to be used as a beast of burden. President Lincoln later on wrote back to thank but declined the offer. Very well. Also, in response to the colonial threats, and perhaps with the realization that if you can't fight them, join them, Thailand during the reign of King Rama V, which is the son of King Mongkut, the king of Thailand, from the period of 1869 to 1910, embarked on an ambitious and far-reaching modernization, westernization program. The Royal Court hired many foreign technicians and advisors to assist in the process of modernization. Some of these foreign advisors were given wide responsibilities and were honored by the king with noble title. King Chulalongkorn also added personal diplomacies to Thailand's foreign policy by visiting major European capitals twice in 1897 and 1907. He was warmly received by European royalty and by the French president. The visits were aimed at inducing European powers to accept Thailand as a sovereign state and to accord its equal rights in the international community. After World War I, in which Thailand joined with the Allies and thus emerged on the victorious side, Thailand began to renegotiate the division of unequal treaties that it concluded with a number of Western powers during the height of colonialism. The first country to have signed a new treaty based on equality was the United States. It was also with the help of an American advisor in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, a young Harvard law instructor and the son-in-law of Woodrow Wilson, named Francis B. Sayre, that Thailand successfully renegotiated new and equal treaties with all other European governments. Thailand found itself after the Second World War thrust into the midst of the Cold War. The emergence of monolithic communist empire, the decline of colonial powers in Asia, and the indigenous nationalist movement in Asia to assert their claims to independence from colonial powers constitute the new prevailing environment which necessitated a change in the strategies of Thai foreign policy. Thailand's position in the immediate post-war World War II period was quite vulnerable due to its official alliance with the Japanese during the war. European powers considered Thailand a defeated nation and thus made several demands for compensation. It was the United States who stood by Thailand and salvaged its status. Under the circumstances of bipolarizations, Thailand did not have much room for diplomatic initiatives and maneuver, and decided to throw its weight behind the Western Bloc under the leadership of the United States, whose desire was to fill in the power vacuum in Southeast Asia after the decline of colonial rule, and whose primary policy was worldwide containment of communism. This alliance, although marked the return of Thailand's foreign policy to traditional linkage with the West, was quite a departure from Thailand's traditional multi-alliance and ideology-free foreign policy. The outbreak of the Korean War was a turning point for both Thailand and the United States insofar as the military defense of Southeast Asia was concerned. The United States' involvement in the Southeast Asia Collective Defense Treaty in 1954 and the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO in short, in 1955, was prompted by United States policy to contain the then xenophobic China, which was perceived as bending upon exporting revolution and fomenting insurgencies, coupled with the tendencies to commit aggression. Thailand, as the only country in Southeast Asia which emerged from the war unscathed and shared a long border with Laos and Cambodia, was perceived as being strategically the most important member of SEATO. To many Western observers, if Thailand, with the help of the United States and other friendly powers, was maintained as a strong and prosperous anti-communist bulwark in Southeast Asia, the growing threat from China and North Vietnamese might be checked and contained. Despite the growing ties with the United States and its linkage with the West, Thailand still has, up to that time, no leverage in world politics, and its voice remained practically anonymous in international fora such as the United Nations. At times, Thailand's policy did not appear to be in step, regrettably to some of those people who are so radical, with the radical assertions of newly independent neighboring countries, which had gone through tumultuous experience of revolution based on emotion rather than growth and development of the country. The Laotian crisis, which began in 1959 and the failure of CETO PAR to take action as a group in face of that crisis, and the growing communist strength in North Vietnam forced Thailand to rethink its foreign policies of aligning itself mainly with Western powers, particularly with the United States. Out of its frustrations over the foreseeable collapse of CETO and the Vietnam after the Laotian crisis, Thailand began to realize that its security and well-being were much intertwined with those of its neighboring countries, and that its future and destination depend very much on how each country of the region could collectively exert control over the regional destiny. This realization marked the dawn of the serious effort to force regionalism in Southeast Asia through partnership of equality, commonality of interest, and mutual benefits. It was this idea of regionalism which proved to have a far-reaching security implications on Thailand's foreign policy during the 1980s. The burden of Southeast Asian history is a formidable obstacle to regionalism. It was called a, quote, Balkanized region where Western nations carved out their colonies and protectorates during the period of imperialistic expansionism and left colonial legacies of political and economic isolations which characterize the states in Southeast Asia. The first ever attempt of the indigenous states to play a part in determining the futures of their own region found its expression in the formation of the Association of Southeast Asia, in short acronym called ASA in Bangkok in 1961, by the Confederation of Malaya, the Philippines, and Thailand. On a personal note, I had the honor of drafting that first Bangkok Declaration. This purely original effort was stifled in September 1963 by regional disputes following the establishment of Malaysia and the conflicting territorial claim of the Philippines and the oppositions by Indonesia, which led to a tense period of confrontation. Tension ran very high and military clashes were known to have occurred. Thailand committed to the cause of collective regional strength and leverage, trying to divert the confrontation and patiently persuade the feuding parties to come to negotiating table. Thailand urged restraints between the conflicting nations and tried to convince everyone that much was at stake. After many attempts, Thailand was able to convince them to see the wisdom of not only peacefully coexisting, not like a tombstone and the flowers, with one another, but also cooperating with one another for mutual benefits. But communication was a prerequisite. Finally, leaders of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines decided to come to Bangkok to settle their differences and disputes, and later on put the seals of approval on their reconciliation. It was in Bangkok that Thailand initiated the idea of forming an organization for regional cooperation to replace the dormant Association of Southeast Asia, ASA. Then and there, the seeds for the creations of ASEAN, the acronym for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, was sown. On August 8 of 1967, the philosophies underlying ASA found a new expression in the Bangkok Declaration, which marked the beginning of ASEAN with its wider and more solid participation than that of the frail ASA. ASEAN was born out of the political will of the majority of nations in Southeast Asia to work together for the betterment of their people's lives and their understandings and appreciation towards one another, and for the specific settlement of disputes and the creations of cohesive fabrics of Southeast Asia through coexistence, communication, and cooperation. ASEAN marked for the first time the realizations among its member countries that while they used to cast their glance far and beyond, they could galvanize collective regional power to serve their purposes and aspirations. Between the Vietnam War period, Thailand took part in the defense of South Vietnam. the war itself, how futile it might appear to be, bought time for the free countries of Southeast Asia to put their houses in order, to come to terms with one another, to consolidate and strengthen their cooperation, and become more responsible in the shaping of regional destiny. The post-Vietnam War period saw drastic changes in regional and global political configuration, which brought about new challenges for Thailand policymakers. On the international front, world politics shift from the bipolarization toward multipolarization with the return of China into the world arena, and with Japan and Western Europe gradually resume their political and economic roles. On the regional plane, the United States withdrawal from Vietnam, and from, in fact, I would say, not from Vietnam, but from mainland Asia, mainland Southeast Asia. And the Nixon doctrine created the sense of uncertainty and anxiety over the United States defense commitments on mainland Southeast Asia, and therefore a power vacuum. The communization of the three Indo-Chinese states, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and the threat of a falling domino represents a lurking danger to the security of the free nations in the region. During the 3 years period after the fall of Vietnam, between 1975 to 1978, the relations between the Indo-Chinese states and ASEAN countries were uneasy, but peaceful coexistence was maintained. During those 3 years, Thailand and other ASEAN members sought to put their minds and resources together to construct a new equation for regional peace and stability. Previous to that, Thailand and a number of ASEAN countries sought and normalized relations first with the PRC, People's Republic of China, and then later on with Vietnam. And even as far back as 1971, and that was 4 years before the end of the Vietnam War, ASEAN tried to maintain a credible non-aligned image, including sponsoring the concept of Southeast Asia as a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, which have been known as the soft pan. The basic tenet of it is that no international power rivalry would be a good thing for the region. At the first summit in Bali in 1976, in Indonesia, Bali, ASEAN codified in contractual form the principle of Pacific settlement of disputes among ASEAN members, and the spirits of the Bali summit further solidify political and economic cooperations among ASEAN states. Until early 1978, when Vietnamese Premier Pham Van Dong visited the ASEAN countries, there was still hope, that peace would reign in the region and coexistence would be a real possibility. The Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia in 1978 and its occupation thereafter shattered the hope and vision. The falling out between China and Vietnam worsened and culminated in an armed confrontation. The Soviet involvement with Vietnam and escalation of Soviet military presence in the Pacific further complicated the security equations of the region. The Cambodian question, therefore, has a genuine potentials of developing into major power confrontation. The Cambodian conflict has been perceived by my own country, Thailand, as the most serious threat to regional order and security. In the face of this challenge, we put relentless efforts in strengthening regional cooperation and forging policy cohesiveness among ASEAN regarding the Cambodian question. Our policies on Cambodia is guided by the principle of neutralization externally and self-determination internally, and by the search for a modus vivendi which would preserve real peace and security in the region. It is obvious that Thailand cannot and will not accept Vietnam's insistence on attaining its total security at the expense of the vulnerability of its neighboring countries in the region, not to mention China's perceptions of these new threats from her southern border. Our efforts have been putting political and economic pressures on Vietnam
persuading, enticing, coaxing Vietnam to negotiate a political solution which is just and long last to the Cambodian question. Our efforts and initiatives have gained for Thailand an increasing recognition in the international community and a new sense of confidence in our conduct of foreign affairs. Our policies toward the problem has been prudent and measured, and we will stay the course. Just as we must avoid illusion and false expectations on our side, we will remain firm on our policy, which we believe is heading toward the right direction. Bearing in mind what President Reagan recently said in his address on a summit to the joint session of the Congress, and I quote, "A quick fix don't fix big problems." As I have noted earlier, the promotion of commerce with the outside world has been a vital component of Thailand's foreign policy since the early periods of Thailand's history. During the height of the colonial period, greater interactions and trade with the Western powers were seen as indispensable to Thailand's modernizations and thus survival as an independent nation. Given the growing economic interdependence among nations today, the promotion of international trade and commerce remains indispensable and continues to be one of the guiding principles of Thailand's foreign policy. Long gone are the days when a nation could live in self-contained and self-sustained economy unperturbed by external developments. Being a developing country, it is only logical that a major part of our foreign policy should serve to further the implementations of our national development plan, which is aimed at achieving economic growth through free enterprise and an export-led strategy. Thailand relies heavily on international trade, foreign investment, and resultant transfer of technology to provide impetus for economic development and industrialization. The growth of export, which account for over 20% of our gross domestic product, has contributed in no small way to Thailand's impressive rate of economic growth over the last 2 decades, averaging 8% annually. That was during the good times. We now struggle to keep 4.5%, 5%. It has also been responsible for speeding the pace of our industrialization, as manufactured goods make up an increasingly substantial share of our total exports. It is clear that without an open economy, Thailand would never have been able to attain the high rate of economic growth that it has. While opening their doors to foreign trade and investment, Thailand and her ASEAN partners have today become one of the highest growth areas in the economically dynamic East Asia Pacific region. The ASEAN countries are often cited as a model of economic progress through free enterprise and market-oriented policies for other developing countries. The emergence of a sense of regionalism and interdependence of survival among the ASEAN countries have been given a concrete expression in terms of economic cooperation. Thailand and her ASEAN partners have not only sought to foster economic cooperation among themselves, but have also collectively sought to intensify their trade and investment ties with other countries, in particular the advanced industrialized nations. One of my friends, ASEAN partner, had described that the attitude in these countries that the multinational cooperation is not a dirty word. More and more, the focus of our foreign policy is shifting towards taking advantage of the great potentials for economic cooperation that exists within the thriving East Asia Pacific region. You heard about the Pacific is the place where the 21st century will be, and in fact the 21st century has already arrived. So it is within this East Asia Pacific region, which is rapidly becoming the world's biggest trading region and increasingly evolving to an integrated and independent economic system, that we shall look forward to helping develop for the benefits of all those who live within this basin. We see considerable opportunity for countries in the region to cooperate in unleashing the vast economic resources and dynamism of the region for mutual benefit. Thailand and her ASEAN partners seek to encourage movement towards this direction. However, the dark clouds of protectionism had cast an ominous shadow over the trend toward building a prosperous Pacific community of nations. Here in the United States, the rising concern over the budget and trade deficits has culminated in a rise in protectionist fervor and the introductions of over 300 protectionist legislations. Part of my work today has been largely dealing with the Department of Commerce and others on this subject. Past experience has proven that protectionism works to the detriment of all of us. Let us be mindful of the fact that it was a system of an open and free trading system established under the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, GATT, in 1948, with the United States playing a leading role, that made possible the peaceful and constructive developments among free nations of the world after World War II. The magnanimity and the generosity with which the United States has shared, extended in helping to rebuild a more prosperous world in which nations could seek to better the lives of their people through free enterprise and freedom has provided a solid underpinning for the period of relative peace and stability that we have enjoyed over the past 40 years. Indeed, the stakes are too high for us to succumb to protectionism. Instead of allowing protectionism to gather force and shrink trade and growth, it is incumbent upon us to work together to liberalize world trade, to ensure the peace and progress achieved so far. We now live in an interdependent world in which peace, security, and progress of every nation and every region are intertwined and indivisible. And in this sense, the course and conduct of Thailand's foreign policy will, in more significant ways than one, have bearing on the United States and the world. Your presence here tonight, I take it, bears a testimony to the fact that our foreign policy does matter. In terms of size and power, the United States' relation with Thailand can be compared to that between the lion and the mouse. But this is the mouse that has been affectionately regarded by the United States as more than just an old friend and ally. The relationship between Thailand and the United States has evolved through time and become multidimensional. Thailand's via ASEAN is now a moderating influence in international affairs. ASEAN itself is a conduit between the North and the South, with its political and economic progress and regionalism efforts. ASEAN has become an example for other developing countries, and its success bodes well for the free market economy of which the United States is a firm proponent. In a world of East-West, and I quote, enduring competition, and that was the words of the President of the United States. The success of ASEAN is a victory for the motto of the United States, which the United States espouses without firing a single shot. Thailand and ASEAN are parts and parcels of the dynamic East Asia and Pacific region, which is becoming the world's largest trading bloc. Demonstrated pragmatism, firmness of principles, and clarity of direction in the conduct of our foreign policy. If our past track record is any indication of the future, I believe Thailand can make a meaningful contribution to the cause of real peace and progress in Southeast Asia, and therefore in the world at large. Before I end, I wish to extend to you all my best wishes for the happy holiday.
Well, we certainly thank you for a very comprehensive, interesting, and helpful presentation. As is our custom, we'll entertain questions until 10 minutes after 7. If you have to leave early, now would be the proper time to do so. As I say, the question and answer period will last until 10 minutes after 7 and no later. I'll recognize those with questions. I'll ask the ambassador to repeat the question if he would, before answering it. And if necessary, I will. Who has the first question? Yes, Ms. Burke.
You don't have to repeat it, Excellency, because forgive a non-question. I just want to say that if the old rubric is correct, that those who don't understand history are bound to repeat it. I stand in awe of the fact that you perhaps were the first to address this body, at least in my time, with an incredibly comprehensive sense of history. And I want to thank you for that understanding, and hopefully you will help us improve upon history.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad that I don't have to repeat it. I love to repeat it. I got it.
Yes, sir.
How strong is Thailand internally? By that I mean, is there a communist party in Thailand? Are there revolutionary parties? How capable is Thailand, if it has such parties, able to handle these problems and still remain in the same kind of governmental framework they have now?
Thank you. I hope I don't have to repeat the question. I think it's largely concerning the communist insurgencies as well as subversion, and whether Thailand would have the chance to survive. I would say so. This is a subject which might be a little difficult to cover in a short answer. You will remember, of course, that Thailand was, I think, among, at least in Southeast Asia, the first victim of the export revolution. Then, very good friend now, the People's Republic of China, was then bent upon, and also created, vetted from China, the Communist Party of Thailand, which is support and hoping that it will bring down the regimes in Thailand, which have always tried to continue its way of life, being an independent and free country. Now, the efforts at one time, at a certain point, seem to be culminating towards a certain kind of victory in their own views. There was a great deal of confusion. There was a war in Indochina, and there was a support coming from Vietnam on one part, and also from China, which used to be together. And we were, I think, in difficult period at that time, because we were not isolated. We were not on an archipelago. We have long border with Laos and Cambodia, and penetration would come in several forms. Arms have been, siphoned into our territories. The communist members of the Communist Party of Thailand have been sent to in North Vietnam and also sent to China. I know those places, but because of the fact that the policies internally, that the governments and the people of Thailand, including the throne has, perhaps I forgot to mention about the significance of the throne. The throne has also brought back our people to the fold of our society. It is not merely suppression alone. Suppression we must and we did. At the same time, we also offer a better alternative, to the people to come back to the fold of society. Also, I think I would say that on top of that, I think we talked about refugees a moment ago, and I know how a program which America has, been so generous. And you know that the people don't come away from the so-called egalitarian heavens, to supposedly hell like my country, unless we really have progress. So in a way, the victory has been won because of the developments in Thailand. The social justice which have become more markedly as days go by. And then at the same time, externally, because China has realized the importance of ASEAN, and China of the present day, which is no longer xenophobic, and China which is greater objectivity, China which wants to develop itself, sees the importance of ASEAN, on this Cambodian question, because another front has been opened by the Vietnamese in her design to control over Indochina. She needs the Soviet Union, and that's why the Soviet Union has come into the Cam Ranh base, and now, can, I think, exercise the influence in a more, shall we say, a more succinct way than in the past. But all these factors combined led to the downfall of the Communist Party of Thailand. And I think it's right now we have really put them on the back, and they won't be able to emerge Right now, of course, only Vietnam has threatened, I think, Thailand, of resurrecting, they say resurrecting because part of the Communist Party, in order to make it a leverage with Thailand in dealing with the Cambodian question or Cambodian question. I hope I answered the question in such a short time.
Yes, Professor Najjar.
Your Excellency, the stability of Thailand has been contrasted with the relative instability of the Philippines. As a politician, would you have any words of advice for Mr. Marcos?
I have not yet become a politician, I'm still a diplomat, you know.
As a diplomat.
I think we have our weakness too, and I think the audience has been very kind not to mention a number of things. But even if this question come up, then I will answer them too. But I would like to explain to you this way. There are several ways of doing things. The trouble with our strengths in one respect, the ASEAN regionalism, and the fact that people realize that they have this power for the good, for the constructive purposes, the power to influence, to moderate, to put even the Vietnamese and the Soviet, on the wrong side of the fence. Never before it had been done. It had been done in the United Nations, on Cambodia, on Afghanistan, to our cooperation. This has been made to refute the argument that the Soviet, for example, is a natural alliance and a non-alliance. We have done that, we put them in the dock also. But I think you must realize that once we share that strengths and we can do things constructively, then there are the rules of the game. And the rules of the game is that there must be no interference in the internal affairs of one another. But I will answer you one question that if you talk about concern, naturally I must be concerned. Because all these are the pillars of my strength, And anything, if the one pillar become weaker, then I am concerned. But to the point, to the extent that Thailand would barge in and advise and coaxing the Philippines, that would be unthinkable. That would wreck, I think, the very basis which ASEAN can prosper. But on the other hand, I'd like to point out one thing, This is something of the carrot, if not the stick, nature. And the carrot is there that whoever in the Philippines, whoever may be in power or come up to power, can know very well that their futures will have, be much brighter if they talk with their ASEAN partners. And the ASEAN partners stand ready to help, to extend help, and to make it life more meaningful. And this is something of, perhaps of the carrot nature. So you would think perhaps that if we have not chased our friends, the Philippines, then you will understand our problem also.
Yes.
In line with what you just said, the Philippines are concerned about removing the American naval and air bases in the Philippines. Would ASEAN look with favor on that, or is that a way of adding U.S. protection to that whole area of the Pacific?
I don't know whether the Philippines want to have the bases out. It may appear to be some kind of leverage in dealing with the administration of the United States, because America is concerned. And the front lines, you see, Thailand has been termed also the front line state. And the front line, I think it's very wise for any superpower to make sure that the front line is not your homeland. It's extended beyond. The Soviet increase, in the Pacific has been I think it's something which people must take notice. It's the biggest fleet they have. It is the kind of, now the ability has been extended because of the acquiring of the warm water ports, in Southeast Asia. But I don't think that, in spite of what I said a moment ago about the zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, which has been enunciated by the ASEAN countries, that it is not the ASEAN countries who are talking about getting the American out. Whether the American would be out in good time or not, it is a question to be pondered in the future. We're talking about the introduction of another power into the region, which will create rivalry and therefore tension. Now, as far as I can ascertain, right now, the presence of America, and the basis of America in the Philippines is part and parcel of that which provides greater stability from the military standpoint to the region. What we are trying to do politically and also on, the ASEAN have no military pact among themselves, but the fact that the presence or the independence and the survival of one is so important to the other, serve notice to those who might try some monkey business.
Yes, sir.
Can you give us some idea of the commercial relations between Thailand and the United States?
I hesitate to do that. I thought I wrote a piggyback in making sure that we had something of significance. I used to say to many audience in many American towns that I'm talking to them because I happen to be affecting their lifestyles, their livelihoods, and their standards of living, through the Pacific regions. And I'm talking to Thailand as an integral part of ASEAN, and ASEAN, which is an integral part of East Asia, with Japan and China. We always say that it is always an integral part, and that region is a place where you do business with. The ASEAN countries together are 280 something millions of people completed with resources and whatnot. It's the 5th ranking trading partner in the United States. Now, the only hesitating part that I like to say is when it comes to Thailand. And Thailand trades with the United States in the tune of right now about a little more than $2 billion both ways. $2 billion is very meager, small sum. The United States used to be our number 1 trading partner. Japan is now number 1. And the distance between the number 1 and number 2 is quite a fair bit. I hope it is not our mistake, because we like to do business with America. Our Prime Minister has traveled here and have a word that he wants to do business with America. Our businessmen want to do business with America. But you will have to be, I think, competitive, on that count. But $2 billion and something, $2 billion and something is something of a nature which you might say, well, in that case, you might have been having a favorable balance. Yes, last year only. And only last year that Thailand started to have a favorable balance with the United States. But now people are talking about the favorable balance, and they have forgotten about those years that we have unfavorable balance. We're not seeking what's the balance with the United States. We're seeking a wider participation in terms of world trade. We think that China and others, and Japan and all these, and the facts of the involvement. And this is true. I did say this when the president was at Guangdong on the Normandy coast, last year, and with due respect and all that. But the true fact of the situation emerged at that time already. The United States has greater trade volume and investments activity with the East Asian Pacific basin, Pacific Rim. And this is growing much faster. And we're not saying that this would be added, to the detriment of the European countries, which you have a deep values which you share with them. And in fact, the European powers have become involved because we said, now the more that we become prosperous, and the more we would engage in international trade, we would buy, we would sell. Our theory is an old theory, focused on trade.
Yes, ma'am.
ASEAN and Thailand primarily support the UN's line in resolutions for Kasemsri conflict, but Vietnam continues to refuse to have anything to do with the United Nations. Do you think the United Nations will ever have any role in the resolution of political settlement of the Kasemsri conflict?
Could you repeat that, please? We weren't able to hear it back here.
I've given the ambassador an unfair burden of repeating all the questions, so I'll relieve him of that particular task. Will the UN ever have an effective role with respect to the Kampuchean conflict?
I think the United Nations already does have an effective role. But sometimes you question, you question about the ability to act, And as you know, it's not the United Nations, it was the ASEAN inspired and induced resolutions which have been passed successively, for 5 years or so at the United Nations. The reason which I've talked about, getting them for the first time into the wrong side of the fence, which they should be, unless they behave in the international community. The same thing applies to Vietnam and applies to the Soviet Union. But I think it would be wrong to say that these resolutions are just pure papers. They were bothered. I don't think my Russian friends like it one bit, and the Vietnamese was truly annoyed, and it represents, some kind of pressure which has been put on them. We've seen some people describe as greater flexibility that they might come around, to negotiate and to find a political solution to the problem, which we contend. We don't think it is a military solution going to solve the problem, not because the ASEAN says so, but because it involves so many people, involves a big power, it involves China, which I don't have to defend China, China can defend itself. But China can also have the perception of threat as well, and that's why China will have to think, all these things will have to be taken into account. Now look at it that way, then you will know the United Nations would try. The President Secretary General, Mr. Perez de Cuya, used to be the Under Secretary of State, and he was invited to my country when I was the Under Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. He was my guest. I took him to the border, let him see things, and he's been talking to the Vietnamese, he's been talking to outside, he's been talking to ASEAN countries. One of his principal assistants is now doing their very best. I think it is not the question of the lack of will on the United Nations part, in this case, nor of the ASEAN part, to find a solution. I think it is a question of reality. I say reality more than sincerity. Reality, because I think it's the Vietnamese is doing something futile, to make itself or to make something permanentalize the enmity with China. So I think it's at least from the policy standpoint, the United States have supported ASEAN's action. We think we are on the right course. Be critical if you will, on the execution of the policy, but on the policy itself, I would defend it.
Yes, sir.
What's Thailand's position on atomic weaponry?
The question is, what is Thailand's position on atomic weapons?
Well, that's simpler, matter for me because I don't possess it, and therefore we do not advocate it. I think it is the talk they had in Geneva, and which had been sort of air before, is something which is the sentiment which many people share. You see, that a war, nuclear war, cannot be won and must never be fought. So, from the point of view of Thailand's position, on atomic energy, we certainly for the peaceful use. Even on the peaceful use is being debated in Thailand. The fact that we haven't got one of the nuclear power station, despite the fact that we were not able to produce oil until recently, the gas was not flowing into one of these longest pipeline underwater, which we do now possess. But the people are so conscious, so afraid of it. And yet, we should not look at it, as something to look at the cause, because you are looking at it from the point of view of being part and parcels of this earth. And then one has to be practical. And I think I would subscribe to what has been described in the recent joint session of the Congress, that what we seek is something of a real peace, ability to coexist. I used to challenge my Chinese boss at one time, the ability to kill me and perhaps my desire to knock him off, but I was not able to do so, but he could. But raised upon, the superiority, in his view, the superiority of his system and mine. But I thought that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and I said, you go and prove it. If you prove it superior to the Japanese who, inherited your civilization and sitting on a rock and still deliver, then you don't have to shoot me. But I have said something here in my speech. I hope you took note of that. That we were able to prove the point, and it was not America who needed to make that point. Because America would be too big, too large, and too, for my Africans and South American friends, to emulate. But there are models, and these models are small developing countries who flourish, as I said, in free enterprise and in greater freedom.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Ambassador, did you comment
on the possibility of the Soviet Union maintaining the sphere of influence in Southeast Asia, and how, as a European country, it will be able to maintain the sphere of influence there.
Would you comment on the possibility of the Soviet Union maintaining a sphere of influence in Asia?
It does have now a foothold, you see, and I think it's stretching from the Indian Ocean, and now through the South China Sea with all the archipelagos, the important arteries, for a number of countries, for Japan, the energy coming from the Middle East, for United States to trade and commerce that, flow through that strategic region of South China Seas and the adjacent, countries, littoral states of South Asia. I think the fact that you cannot deny now is that the Soviet Union, because of the Vietnamese action, the Vietnamese, first of all, when they first came to us, and when in the confusion, they were saying that they went into Cambodia to save the Cambodian people from extinction, and we have to remind them of the record, at the United Nations, which they extol the virtues of the Pol Pot-ians, along with the Soviet Union and who else, the defenders of the regimes, and how come that they come and change their mind and want to save the Cambodian people from the genocidal actions of Pol Pot. But then when they came in later, and we understood the score. We said, okay, well, you were so, preoccupied with the question of threat, perceived threat in particular, because the South Vietnamese is not going to be easy swallow in spite of the military victory. It's going to be prone to something, and therefore, since the relationship with China has been detected already, that could be something of on the rock. They're bound to feel uncomfortable with the regime, which at one time was close to China. So they decided, okay, well, in that case, everything justified if my security is involved, and I must have the total security. That's what I said. At the expense of the other, which means total vulnerability to the other. I can do all these things as long as justified, and not so. I think what we live in interdependent world. That's why we think that the talk should be going on between the United States and the Soviet Union, because this is an interdependent world. It cannot be a total and absolute for someone. So I think the Soviet Union had seen that opportunity and came in and stayed. The problem, of course, I don't know. Mr. Deng Xiaoping said the other day, so he said, well, keep the Vietnamese out of Cambodia, but you may remain. In fact, you don't have to say you may remain. I think they're going to remain. And therefore, I think their presence, in spite of being European power and all that, will remain. And that's why we think it is better if Vietnam can come to a conclusion, of this question of Cambodia, because we think it's going to put things in proper perspective and will not make Vietnam so vulnerable and have to be so dependable. Many people have talk about what is called the carrot theory, giving something aids to Vietnam. But can a nation like that develop? A nation with most of their manpower is in the armed forces occupying another country, so poor, because it will be dropping like, I don't know, I think it's, I used to say 5 years ago that not even the man upstairs can manage that kind of economy. So I think it's the presence and the reality is there. But you know also that the Soviet is mindful of what the ASEANs feel, because we've told them the options are there, to do trade with us. And I think Mr. Gorbachev, if I'm not wrong, is thinking right now, that his system might be defeated by your system and the others. Not by guns, by missiles and all that, but by the advancements, by the growth of the free world economies. And these would put, I think, the system in jeopardy. And that's why he's going to develop. And to develop, it needs money. It's like a good old theory that we all know that. You can't just simply develop without money.
Yes, sir.
For many years, your country has been the source of illicit drug traffic. Our countries have worked together over a number of years to solve that. Could you share with us your own view of that situation now, and perhaps identify any problems that would be on the horizon?
Would you comment upon the problem of drug traffic in Southeast Asia?
In Thailand in particular, I think that's what we want to say. And I think it's a question which we see now, the fruits of our cooperation. I think it's, in drugs and Nancy Reagan I think it's illustrative, the point. There are two sides to the coin, There are also the markets, no markets, and the mistake that even we made at one time when we banished opium smokings and then, let these new and more insidious drugs took hold, the heroin. For many years, many people said, okay, let's stop growing, the source of the heroin and the opiums, in the Golden Triangle which Thailand shares with Laos and Burma. Now, my Burmese friend, of course, has a tough time to have control of his territory. I don't know. I can't answer for Laos myself. I can only say about Thailand and then the efforts, which are a national commitment as far as we're concerned. A national commitment because our king is involved, and because of the special position of our king, everybody was involved to try to, first of all, the substitution crop. And people talk about it as though something over and done with in one day time. Even the king had to object because he did not know how so many people, the huge tribes whom we have no control, going to turn out to be bandits and whatnot, and the situation will be so out of control. And there were armies of illicit, drug traffickers and who else involved in that region, which you might have heard. And the situation will be just simply madness if we don't go step by step. I think the progress has been made, in such a way that this step by step had reduced the opium growing in Thailand to the point now, and even from the point of view of drugs production, as you know, the chemicals also coming, even from Malaysia, was treated as a crime, and a crime which must be paid with life, because it concerns, in their view, national security. Recently, it has been found also in the Congress that Thailand has become a net importer. And yet it doesn't mean that, that there is no growing of opiums, that there are still productions of heroin, but it's become a net importer because it's been successful, the program has been successfully, and it has been, I think, can be testified by the members of the Congress. Many of them have made pronouncements, and many of them have also visited our country. The road ahead is still there, and we will continue, to try to combat these scourge. We'll be with you, because it's our nation too, which is now suffering as well. The Thai youth, and they're not a small percentage if you're talking to the population. And this is an effort which we must, I think, link hand together to try to solve.
Our last question, Mr. Shmali.
Your Excellency, would you comment on the role that the Thai military plays in the internal politics of the country?
Would you comment upon the role of the Thai military in internal politics in Thailand?
Thank you for a very polite question. I don't mind. I remember that about a year ago, and not because of recently the activities of the coup, the so-called coup in Bangkok on the 9th of September, I was asked in Houston at 7 o'clock in the morning about why they should go and invest in Thailand, because there had been military coups and other things. And then I have to describe one thing, and why I'm not in favor of unconstitutional changes, and I don't believe in an undemocratic way of life. But one thing which I should stand out, I think, in terms of continuity. And I thought that people who were dealing with Thailand in the first instance, of course, would be interested in the continuity. And the continuity of policies, the continuities of improvements of the implementation of policies, improve policy as well improve implementation. And I think that has been the hallmark, of the government of Thailand, no matter what. By military, by civilians, the treaty obligations. In fact, the investment scenes have become more generous, more cooperative. And we have never found an instance that Thailand had turned back to the international scene, And I thought that is indeed the important point. I said, now if you see continuity, then I suggest dealing with Fidel Castro of Cuba and Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, who've been around for quite a while. Having said that, I would like to point out, however, that because the military had been involved in the national structures, not recently, but in the olden days, the defending task, of the people, and I say the people because the people rose and become an army, have become something of a role which they must be involved in affairs. But then when people have guns and all that, they're bound to exert their influence to a certain extent. And Thailand experience with democracies have been having it's all ups and downs because Thailand had never been a colony, whether it be the system that the Philippines might have taken from you or from our Malaysian friend might have taken the parliamentary systems from the British, tradition, or from my friend in Indonesia, from the Dutch heritage of democracies. But I think we have come a long way. We have come a long way. The last general election, which have been demonstrated clearly how many peoples were involved. The recent elections of the mayor of Bangkok is also another illustrated point. My prime minister, when he came here the last time, he was an ex-military man, and not elected, but and yet in the parliamentary systems, like the Dutch prime minister, whom I had the honor to call on a number of occasions, was elected by the House of Representatives, wholly elected by the people. And he told President Reagan that he said at that time, he said, Mr. President, this time I have come with a different mandate, than the last. And I think this is something which we have witnessed, and the inherent strength, and that's how we have overcome the 1980, 81, yes. And these recent, you don't expect the people will change their mind, their attitude overnight. But I think the lesson has been learned and one, very well. The Thai press have come out, in no time, and I think among the press in Asia, I think we can claim that it's one of the freest anywhere. And I think it's with the my military friends may think of my remark today, they will have to agree with me that it's been in keeping, with the changing, and I think it's developing in a positive way as aspirations of the people.
Mr. Ambassador, this has been truly an extraordinary evening. I think the Thai reputation for lucidity and forthrightness and intelligence and wisdom have been firmly underlined. We're